had their loved one in a nursing home, the doctors told them, okay, your father only has 2 to 3 days to live. She immediately called me and I gave her some instructions to follow. She followed them. And the next day she called, Jackie, he's sitting up, he's eating pancakes, he's having his boost, he's talking, he's at the table. And she was ecstatic. I was too. And he ended up living for 6 to 7 weeks later.
Are you a caregiver to a loved one suffering from Alzheimer's or dementia disease? This is the Lindsay House Show, where we teach caregivers the practical, medical, and biblical wisdoms needed to inspire hope, change, and healing in your and your loved one's life. Listen in to receive coaching on stress relief, brain health, prayer strategies, and lifestyle improvement. Now, join your coach, certified dementia care expert, Mrs. Jackie Lindsay.
To be able to connect natural information to spiritual information and how God heals anything. It is an awesome time for me to be here. I want you to know that God always is healing. And I have been a part of a group, a support group that I started years ago, where a husband came in and said his wife had Alzheimer's disease, and a doctor had recommended that he come to my group. Well, 6 months later, he tells us through all the information that he has gained from being a part of the support group, all the paperwork that we handed him to read, study, and believe, and his belief in the Lord Jesus Christ. He took his wife back to the doctor, and she was pronounced healed of Alzheimer's disease with no evidence of any type of dementia. We shouted, we rejoiced, and we moved on. I, on the other hand, assumed that, hey, because God called me to it, well, naturally, his wife was going to be healed. But yet I had other caregivers in the group. And some of the reports were that when they had their loved one in a nursing home, the doctors told them, okay, your father only has 2 to 3 days to live. She immediately called me and I gave her some instructions to follow. She followed them. And the next day she called, Jackie, he's sitting up, he's eating pancakes, he's having his boost, he's talking, he's at the table. And she was ecstatic. I was too. And he ended up living for 6 to 7 weeks later. Now, what does that mean? That means that God gave him the time he needed and wanted for his entire family to come from far and near to visit. And when he passed away, he went in peace, not curled up in a fetus position, looking as though he was in pain, but he died peacefully. I also did workshops, and out of the workshops, I would have a caregiver that would call me in the middle of doing a workshop and say, Jackie, my mother only has 2 to 3 days to live. That's what they're telling me. And I told her what to do, and she followed it to the T. The only thing is the staff, after a day or two, didn't do it. But she lived 6 to 7 weeks longer. She started talking. She recognized her granddaughter. She started eating. They started joking and wanting to know how is she doing on her violin. And it was just marvelous. And her last day was very peaceful. And the family had a chance to talk and to say goodbye in such a way that gave them peace. Now, since this happened in my early stages, being able to see that again became very difficult. And why? And I can't tell you why, I just don't know. All I know is that people were able themselves, the caregiver, to be under less stress. They became very accepting. They challenged their loved one. Their loved ones tried to rise to the occasion. Some days were extremely very good, and we thought it was going to last. And eventually it did not. So I'm not saying I have a perfect record, but I have a perfect record in believing God is the healer and he will do it again. And what I want you to learn from this is that the caregiver needs to be able to take care of themselves also. And one of the main things that happened was the stress and anxiety that caregivers had in trying to work with their loved one and be there. It lessened to the degree that they were able to live their lives, and they were content when it was time for their loved one to go on to be with the Lord. Now, I have caregivers that are living their lives, growing closer to the Lord, depending on his power, depending on his timing, and enjoying their lives. And that's one of the main things I have learned, that God put me in this position so I could help the caregivers. And in his timing, he would take care of the loved one.